Allied armies trained to capture fortified cities, but they secured territories where extrajudicial executions replaced military law within an hour. In April 1945, troops breached Dachau, Buchenwald, and Bergen-Belsen, and international regulations stopped working. The 1929 Geneva Convention demanded formal tribunals for all captured combatants, yet soldiers ignored every established protocol. Former inmates surrounded the SS guards and quartered the capos against the concrete barracks. Men struck their captors with wooden planks and bare fists, delivering heavy blows to the head. Officers gave no verbal commands. The only noise was the dull, heavy thud of physical impact. American soldiers watched the violence unfold in silence, occasionally providing weapons or turning their backs. More than 50 years would pass before military historians discussed these specific hours of unauthorized retribution. Zero official records documented those initial executions. What met the United States 7th Army on the outer railway sidings in Bavaria? A stationary freight train holding 2,000 corpses. On April 29, 1945, American forward units pushed toward the town of Dachau. These troops knew standard warfare. The 7th Army had fought continuously since their initial beach landings in Sicily in 1943. They understood high infantry casualties. They knew the results of heavy artillery fire. But conventional military experience offered no preparation for the logistics of this camp. The evidence spilled far beyond the main perimeter fences. Infantrymen secured the supply railway leading directly into the complex. They found nearly 40 boxcars resting on the tracks. No guards remained in sight. The sliding doors stood open. Inside the wooden wagons lay the bodies of prisoners. Exposed to the mild spring weather, the men halted their advance. Combat veterans froze before the train cars. Many of the approaching survivors weighed less than 40 kilograms. From the railway sidings, American troops moved directly toward the main gates of the complex. A standard United States infantryman carried a body weight of around 75 kilograms. The men standing before them possessed barely half that mass, their skeletal frames wrapped in filthy striped rags. The heavy, sweet stench of severe human decomposition saturated the soldiers' cotton uniforms, permanently lingering on their skin and combat gear. Through this crowd of starving prisoners, a small delegation slowly advanced toward the American positions. A Swiss Red Cross representative walked in front, holding a white flag of truce. Two uniformed Schutzstaffel members followed closely behind him, halting before the frontline infantrymen. While thousands of emaciated inmates struggled to simply remain standing, these three men initiated a precise diplomatic protocol. The Red Cross representative and the accompanying officers delivered a brief verbal statement. They formally declared the surrender of the Dachau complex. The original blueprints dictated space for 200 inmates. Yet American troops crossed the surrendered gates and found more than 1,000 locked inside each block. 30,000 people occupied a perimeter meant for a fraction of that number. Logistics dictated every meter. The entire Dachau complex covered roughly 2 square kilometers of carefully surveyed terrain. The commanders strictly optimized space. Soldiers walked past administrative quarters and concrete storage rooms packed with corpses. Heat still radiated from the heavy brick ovens of the crematoria. Some victims died only hours earlier. Others lay decomposing outside, discarded between the identical wooden buildings. Bureaucrats calculated human density to the maximum possible limit. SS administrators managed severe starvation and disease spread with bureaucratic precision. Soldiers simply stood before the physical evidence. Field manuals failed here. 60,000 people awaited British units inside Bergen-Belsen. The footage from Dachau completed a broader picture unfolding across the continent. British armor entered Belsen, finding a demographic matching a mid-sized European city contained entirely behind barbed wire. Months earlier, Soviet infantrymen walked through the vast Auschwitz complex in Poland. They opened wooden warehouses, finding mountains of children's shoes alongside bags of human hair. American columns reached Buchenwald, securing 20,000 remaining survivors. The Allied response shifted from tactical occupation to state-level evidence collection. General Dwight Eisenhower toured the Ordre facility in April, observing the open burial trenches firsthand. He issued a formal directive to commanders across the front lines. Soldiers received orders to photograph burial sites, document execution walls, and film the remaining structures. This methodical visual recording served no tactical military strategy, existing entirely for the future historical archive. Eisenhower anticipated a time when the scale of these locations would be denied. Triage units established emergency wards outside the main wire. Daily administration of the sites collapsed under the strain. The focus shifted toward the physical state of the surviving individuals. Medical personnel recorded a profound emotional fracture across the newly liberated populations. Army manuals dictated every combat rule. They contained 0 lines about managing extermination sites. A legal void opened instantly. SS personnel and capos dropped to the level of their victims. The inversion was total. SS guards stripped off their tunics. They pulled on striped prisoner uniforms. The disguise failed. Hague Conventions protected captured combatant prisoners. They lacked any articles for extermination camp operators. Military doctrine offered nothing. No instructions existed. Doctrine failed. Soldiers found mass executions off the battlefield. Traditional rules of war dissolved. Troops decided on the spot. Some maintained strict discipline. Others stepped back. They watched in silence. No intervention. Justice was absent. Officers sat at field desks. They drafted the first official reports, deliberately minimizing the scope of the violence in their documentation. How did the 7th Army process these early executions? Initial paperwork simply erased the actual scale. The lack of legal instructions forced soldiers to make decisions right on the spot. The 45th Infantry Division stood inside a camp originally built for political dissidents. Now it held over 30,000 starving prisoners. Military regulations hit camp reality. The idealism of a just campaign collapsed. They found no rules for this environment in their field manuals. Soldiers stopped being mere liberators. They became executors of spontaneous justice. A physical red brick wall stood inside the Dachau perimeter. The captured guards were pushed against it. Retaliation replaced military protocol. The first rifle volley at that wall killed 17. Senior SS officers fled through the gates, leaving their subordinates to face the advancing troops alone. By the afternoon of April 29, 1945, the administrative structure of Dachau completely collapsed. The camp held 32,000 starving prisoners that day. The vast SS organization counted over 800,000 members across Europe, but its local leadership dissolved in a matter of hours. Commanders discarded their authority. High-ranking SS uniforms lay abandoned across the floors of the central administration buildings, traded for civilian clothes. The remaining administrative personnel scrambled for cover. Many stripped their insignia and tried to pass themselves off as ordinary medical workers. Temporary command fell to a single SS lieutenant. He stepped forward to formally surrender the perimeter to the first arriving American authorities. But the camp spanned vast acreage, and the surrender meant nothing on the ground. American infantrymen were already breaching the complex from opposite flanks simultaneously, moving without centralized coordination. Every advancing squad encountered isolated perimeters, meaning each group of soldiers faced entirely different scenes. 50 SS guards stood cornered in the coal yard. Gunfire erupted. A heavy .30 caliber machine gun opened fire. Bullets shattered the brickwork. Coal dust rose. The execution took mere seconds. Black smoke filled the air. A standard weapon fires 600 rounds per minute. Hot brass hit the dirt. Infantrymen held the tight perimeter. The battalion commander stepped away. He went to organize outer defensive positions. He left his subordinates alone. The shooting started behind his back. He ran. He screamed. He dropped his gear. He forced the gunner to stop. The noise died down. Men fell. Bleeding bodies lay against the cold wall. 50 people shot at a single brick wall. The yard smelled of burnt gunpowder. The incident forced an official military inquiry. The initial combat report offered a quick justification. It claimed the captured prisoners tried to flee. The narrative suggested a sudden tactical threat, but internal investigations established that the captives made no effort to escape, proving the massacre was an entirely emotional reaction. Who exactly fell under American rifle fire? Officers began to clearly separate Wehrmacht draftees from SS personnel. From the coal yard, the violence shifted toward the railway station and the main perimeter. Near the tracks, an American officer found 4 German soldiers hiding inside a freight car. They crouched just meters away from the abandoned train filled with corpses. The officer opened fire. One of his men immediately climbed into the car. He shot the wounded. No one survived. Inside the main camp, officers implemented a strict procedural sorting. U.S. troops drew a hard line between regular Army conscripts and ideological units. By 1945, the Wehrmacht relied heavily on drafted teenagers and older veterans. American commanders recognized this distinction. Wehrmacht soldiers stepped aside. The SS personnel were marched directly into a restricted zone. Firing squads formed spontaneously. American troops used rifles, standard-issue pistols, and improvised weapons against the segregated guards. Sensationalist post-war rumors claimed hundreds of immediate executions took place that afternoon. But documented U.S. Army internal investigations provide a much stricter count. The confirmed death toll for SS members killed after the surrender stands at 30 to 50. Inmates beat guards with heavy tools. American troops watched them bleed. The right to violence shifted. It passed directly to the survivors. Survivors stripped the captured German guards. They checked bare left arms. SS personnel carried blood group tattoos. 7mm letters marked their armpits. They pointed at these black marks. They showed soldiers their old scars. They named murdered family members. This ink meant death. Soldiers ignored their field manuals. They handed rifles to the inmates. They supplied the means of execution. They stepped back. Prisoners hunted down the camp capos. These men held power during captivity. Now they faced the mob. Capos died first. Sheets became makeshift weapons. Necks snapped. The line between individual crime and collective anger vanished. Nobody intervened. Troops turned away. Despite being trained to uphold the laws of conventional warfare, infantrymen found themselves unable to oppose this raw justice. Legality simply dissolved. One official report recommending a military tribunal landed on General George Patton's desk. The United States Army attempted to conduct a formal investigation into these violations of the Geneva Convention. A military lawyer drafted the paperwork documenting the summary executions of surrendered guards. He handed the completed dossier over for a higher command review. The military protocols demanded a formal court-martial for several implicated infantry officers. As the military governor of Bavaria, General Patton held total executive authority over the entire region during those critical weeks. He reviewed the preliminary documents detailing the extrajudicial killings. According to historical records, the commanding general tossed the pages into a wastebasket. The reviewing military lawyer had already attached a specific conclusion to the file before it reached the top. His legal assessment stated that the infantrymen's actions were illegal, yet unpunishable, given the extreme context of the liberated camp. The chain of command chose institutional silence over a public prosecution of their own soldiers. The physical location of this deliberate cover-up remains unmarked today. Visitors walking through the former prison grounds rarely notice the original execution site. The bare brick wall of the coal yard stands exposed to the elements without a single historical inscription. Today, the coal yard wall bears no commemorative plaques. The 4th Armored Division halted at the empty barracks of Ohrdruf. An institutional vacuum unleashed the inmates. Weeks later, this same vacuum would trigger a typhus epidemic among captive guards at Bergen-Belsen. But on April 4, 1945, it began with abandoned watchtowers. Ohrdruf was a Buchenwald subcamp. The 4th Armored Division deployed 10,000 soldiers. They carried 0 instructions for handling concentration camps. The 89th Infantry Division secured the perimeter alongside them. The SS had vanished. The camp stood empty, but the evidence remained. Guards had forced prisoners to exhume mass graves. They burned the corpses. The heavy smell of charred flesh hung over the open trenches. Then the guards executed the digging crews. The perpetrators fled. They escaped just ahead of the American advance. The strategic retreat failed. Fleeing SS men discarded their uniforms. They sought refuge among the local German population. The towns offered no sanctuary. German civilians captured the disguised guards. They dragged them back. Civilians handed the SS personnel directly to the former prisoners. General George Patton turned his back on the open mass graves, physically overcome by sudden nausea. Leaving the reprisals to the inmates, the Allied command arrived in Ohrdruf with a strategic objective on the 12th of April. The bodies of 7 beaten SS members remained on display near the main gates. General Omar Bradley stood nearby, observing the raw aftermath of the camp's collapse. General Dwight Eisenhower recognized an immediate political necessity, treating this site as a foundation for military justice. He ordered comprehensive photographic documentation, establishing the evidentiary base for future international tribunals. The Nuremberg trials, beginning in November 1945, required irrefutable material proof to prosecute state crimes. Eisenhower commanded every available non-combat unit to walk through the compound and witness the evidence firsthand. This mandate extended directly to the civilian infrastructure bordering the camp. He ordered the mayor and the population of nearby Gotha to conduct a forced tour through the facility. Civilians walked past the decomposing victims, escorted by armed military guards. The town held over 40,000 residents during that specific period. They claimed total ignorance. How did inmates seize the camp before American tanks arrived? Through an international underground committee. U.S. units documented the Ohrdruf aftermath. Meanwhile, Buchenwald prisoners executed a coup. The date was April 11, 1945. The SS fled. Resistance forces stepped in. Soviet prisoners of war led the charge. The International Camp Committee coordinated them. This command unified 18 different nationalities. They seized the watchtowers. Guards surrendered their posts. Weapons changed hands. Captured rifles clicked. Metal bolts slammed shut. Armed inmates stood watch. They guarded the prison. The power shifted instantly. The resistance possessed prepared lists of collaborators. Papers detailed specific individual crimes. They knew who murdered. They knew who tortured. They tracked stolen rations. Jorge Semprún survived the coup. The Spanish inmate documented the transition. His book, Writing or Life, captured everything. The Underground Committee maintained strict order. They acted fast. They isolated the executioners. Retaliation became fully organized. American troops finally arrived. Gates swung open. They found a secure perimeter. The inmates held the keys. Dozens of captured SS guards and capos already sat locked inside the camp prison cells, awaiting their fate. 100 men died by the verdicts of internal Buchenwald tribunals. Having seized control, the Underground Committee immediately deployed its own courts. Between 80 and 100 SS members and capos faced execution following organized, rudimentary trials. Soviet prisoners of war documented hangings and firing squads utilizing captured German weapons. In specific instances, armed prisoners forced captured guards to assume the identical torture positions they had previously mandated. Colonel Robert Allen evaluated the aftermath. His 12th Army Group comprised over 1 million soldiers, representing overwhelming military superiority, yet command formally sanctioned this localized inverted justice. The massive Allied command chose not to intervene or halt the extrajudicial killings. American military personnel actively monitored the ongoing proceedings and maintained their perimeter distance for 3 days. 60,000 sick, 13,000 corpses inside one camp. The 11th British Armored Division fought across Germany. They defeated panzer armies. They survived artillery barrages. They knew war. They were entirely unprepared for this. April 15, 1945. British tanks entered Bergen-Belsen. The gates opened. The living lay tangled among the dead. Typhus controlled the compound. Tuberculosis spread. Men breathed the smell of mass decay. American documentation of atrocities contrasted with the British approach. British forces acted differently on April 15th at Bergen-Belsen. They prioritized rapid biological containment. They needed heavy labor. They captured 80 SS guards. Soldiers marched the SS under armed escort. Rifles pointed at backs. Guards grabbed rotting corpses with bare hands. They dragged them toward deep, open trenches. They threw them down. Flesh tore. Dust rose. British medical teams treated starving prisoners inside sterile field tents. Captive SS personnel worked the infected mass graves without gloves. British commanders issued a strict ban on providing the captive guards with any sanitary or protective equipment. Why did 20 guards perish within a matter of days? The British command deliberately denied the captives medical protection against the spreading typhus infection. This sanitary directive turned forced grave labor into a legalized execution method. Epidemic typhus spreads rapidly through infected lice thriving on the unburied remains. Standing at the edge of the mass graves, the former captors vomited from the stench. Captain Derek Sington supervised the operation, forcing perpetrators to inspect every face before disposal. Within a week, 20 guards contracted the fatal infection and died without medical intervention. This approach bypassed military tribunals, utilizing the biological hazard as an instrument of justice. Nightfall shifted authority away from the army, allowing retribution to unfold beyond official control. Polish survivor Józef Rosenwasser documented the changing power dynamics among the liberated inmates. Small groups dragged the designated capos behind the wooden blocks. The prisoners executed the informants using improvised weapons entirely outside the sight of Allied patrols. 2 weeks later, the British sanitary operations gave way to pure chaos in Bavaria. Liberation did not start with cheers. It began with a terrifying, disorienting silence. A single capo backed away from the barracks. Just hours earlier, he commanded life and death over his block. Now he was defenseless. On April 29, 1945, the gates of Dachau finally opened. Instead of celebrating their freedom, the prisoners spent the first few minutes assessing the sudden shift in power. They stared up at the concrete watchtowers. The platform stood empty. The Waffen-SS guards dropped their rifles. Heinrich Himmler established this facility in 1933. It held over 30,000 inmates on that Sunday. The SS built the oldest internal terror network here, handing daily control to specific prisoners. They delegated beatings to the capos. These selected men wore armbands and carried wooden clubs. They denounced their peers to survive. The collapse of this structure took minutes. The power vacuum opened. Relief morphed into calculated rage. The targets were not the fleeing German officers. The inmates surrounded the internal collaborators. The capos traded blood for extra rations. Their stolen authority lasted exactly 12 years. Inmates dragged former enforcers directly from the barracks. Skulls crack under metal pipes. Heavy stones break ribs. This sudden power vacuum demands immediate blood. Capos fall first. They manage the daily terror routines. Now, victims beat them with camp tools. The revenge is entirely visceral. SS guards try hiding among the surviving population. They drop their black uniforms. They steal standard striped clothing. But civilian rags cannot hide permanent military ink. Prisoners check skin under the left arm. They search for SS blood group tattoos. The Waffen-SS required this biological mark. The dark ink exposes them instantly. Exposure means death. Executions happen directly in the dirt. No trials, no questions. Handcrafted knives pierce chests. The killing spread through 34 camp blocks. No mercy remains. How do you establish order in the middle of a violent prison riot? Political prisoners with administrative experience stepped forward and created their own courts. Yet even in the epicenter of Dachau's spontaneous violence, a legal structure began to take shape. For these men, random revenge was insufficient for the scale of the crimes committed. The camp held over 32,000 survivors upon liberation, and restoring moral order required formalizing the executions of their former tormentors. Improvised tribunals replaced the initial chaos. American infantrymen were officially required by military regulations to stop these lynchings immediately. Instead, soldiers routinely sabotaged these commands and simply looked away while the trials proceeded. The proceedings maintained strict procedural steps, ignoring the ongoing crisis. Witness testimonies were documented right before the execution. Liberators arrived to restore law. Instead, they watched lynchings. They turned away. Allied command faced a paradox. Reactions to internal tribunals became ethical paralysis. Buchenwald held 21,000 survivors. Resistance networks held lists, names of collaborators. As Nazis withdrew, prisoners took control. Expedited justice followed. Bergen-Belsen saw the same. British forces tried maintaining order. They failed. Prisoners settled scores. It happened at night. Allied officers watched. They did nothing. The law required intervention. Reality dictated otherwise. Doctors observed the executions. Chaplains stood by. Both held non-combatant status. Under Geneva Conventions, their silence mattered. This refusal set a legal precedent. Military structures consciously chose non-interference. They observed, they documented, they stepped back. Officers noted the ethical impossibility to condemn inmates in personal diaries. Allied commanders officially withdrew from any direct legal intervention regarding the prisoners' lethal actions. Dozens of camp informants faced strangulation during the very first night following the Allied liberation. While military commanders deliberately looked the other way, the darkened wooden barracks hosted a methodical purge of remaining collaborators. Political prisoners executed their former overseers using intentionally silent blows to avoid alerting the newly arrived patrols. Between 20 and 40 individuals were eliminated without a single sound before the sunrise. Standard military police reports from that immediate post-liberation period omitted any mention of organized retaliation or extrajudicial executions. Army clerks classified these morning discoveries as expected civilian fatalities resulting from transition period internal tensions, officially logging the deaths as simple asphyxiation. By morning, the administration completely shifted its logistical focus away from the dead, prioritizing emergency food rations for 30,000 starving survivors. The nocturnal strikes with steel pipes abruptly ended. Strict protocols of military investigators took their place. By dawn, the Allied administration closed the window for vigilante justice. Command focus shifted to mass sanitation and logistics. Clerks sat at wooden desks. They typed fresh incident reports. The paperwork required a sterile legal foundation. Upcoming proceedings like the Nuremberg trials, scheduled to open in November 1945, demanded a clean historical record. Extrajudicial killings committed by liberated victims did not fit this framework. Outside the command tents, the steady roar of 2.5-ton transport trucks drowned out all other noise. Convoys moved survivors away from the barbed wire. Inside the offices, typists categorized the dead SS guards using a specific bureaucratic euphemism. They recorded the strangulations as spontaneous civilian actions. The wording concealed the murders. The ledger was wiped clean. The new paper trail transformed messy vengeance into orderly military jurisdiction. The U.S. Army soon repurposed the Dachau camp compound itself to host its own formal war crimes tribunals. Months later, the exact same Allied officers who silently permitted the nighttime lynchings occupied the judges' benches at these official international courts. A Soviet officer pushed several dozen captured guards toward the surviving prisoners of the Yanovska camp near Lviv. He offered no tribunal, instructing the inmates that these men were theirs to judge. A year later, this localized collapse of military justice would force Allied commanders to overlook similar executions across Europe. The precedent of abandoning wartime laws originated further east. In July 1944, Soviet forces secured the Majdanek facility near Lublin. This capture occurred 10 months before Western forces breached Dachau, marking the first documented breakdown of conventional legal protocols. When Soviet troops liberated Sachsenhausen, located north of Berlin, they deliberately stepped back. Red Army soldiers maintained complete silence, refusing to intervene while inmates settled accounts with the remaining camp personnel. At Yanovska, the transfer of authority involved no paperwork. No court convened. The Soviet commander walked away, leaving the perpetrators to the survivors. The inmates liquidated the captured guards before the morning arrived. 60,000 inmates. That was Bergen-Belsen on Liberation Day. The gap between doctrine and reality widened here. Dachau presented the exact same legal void. Standard regulations govern prisoners of war. Armies capture combatants. Conventions dictate treatment. Logistics process troops. But this bureaucracy collapsed. Military manuals ignored extermination sites. No rules existed. Commanders faced a bureaucratic blackout. 60,000 starved witnesses defied standard classifications. Standard instructions were never designed for this scale. The Geneva Conventions held no answers. Headquarters issued no directives. The doctrine broke. Generals possessed no legal vocabulary. They failed to classify the perpetrators. They failed to process the victims. Legal guidelines vanished. The books offered nothing. Frontline officers issued spontaneous field judgments regarding prisoner executions without ever consulting the obsolete military doctrine. Today, camp documents reside securely within tribunal archives, but during the initial hours of liberation, formal protocols remained absent. The restrained British approach at Bergen-Belsen differed fundamentally from the American actions inside Dachau. The window between the fall of the Reich and the establishment of Allied governance created a sudden administrative vacuum. Survivors seized this opening to conduct spontaneous retribution against captured guards. For a brief period, frontline commanders silently permitted summary executions across the secured compounds. A week later, military administrations strictly enforced the systematic collection of written evidence. Investigative units soon began compiling documentation to prepare for future trials. The United Nations War Crimes Commission had outlined these legal frameworks in 1943. Slowly, towering stacks of witness reports and photo evidence accumulated across the desks of Allied investigators. Yet those early moments of vengeance slipped through the paperwork. The chronicles remained incomplete. The Hague and Geneva Conventions demanded a legal paradox. American officers had to protect captured SS guards. Formally, General George Patton faced this exact duty. He had to judge his men. Rules were rigid. Reality was not. The 1929 Geneva Convention involved 47 signatory states. None of them anticipated specialized death camp personnel. No treaty clauses covered these specific executioners. The law protected all surrendered combatants. Patton served as the military governor of Bavaria. He received a formal investigation package. Lieutenant Colonel Joseph Whitaker delivered the document. The report detailed unauthorized executions by American troops. It held sworn witness testimonies. Photographs provided clear visual evidence. Recommendations for military trials filled the pages. Patton sat down. He read them. He studied the photographs. International rules required immediate military tribunals. He chose differently. Paper ripped. The sound of tearing thick paper echoed. General Patton destroyed the official military report, detailing the unauthorized executions of camp guards. How did Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks react to the massacres inside Dachau? He ordered his soldiers to guard the outer perimeter. The reasons why the military governor of Bavaria tore up the execution documents survived in his personal diary. Black ink lines on the page preserved his exact reasoning. Patton noted that the enemy were not conventional soldiers. They faced criminals. Normal standards could not judge the reactions of men witnessing such scenes. The United States Third Army occupied Bavaria. The force numbered over 250,000 troops. Patton established unofficial rules for this massive military group. Command decisions translated into deliberate operational gaps. Sparks isolated the Schutzstaffel guards near the coal yard. He designated them for processing. The exact details of this processing remained unwritten. Sparks commanded his troops to focus strictly on securing the camp boundaries. Inside the wire, former inmates cornered the capos. The beatings began immediately. American officers ignored the violence. The command looked outward. A Swiss delegate of the International Red Cross at Dachau drafted precise reports for his headquarters in Geneva, recording only the distribution of humanitarian assistance. The deliberate silence of field commanders demanded a corresponding bureaucratic vocabulary in official military police files. Documents classified the events as unauthorized disciplinary actions against camp personnel. In reality, inmates were beating identified capos and former guards to death. The investigative process relied on a lexicon of evasion. Officers routinely attributed the violence to unidentified former prisoners, noting that military police faced a lack of personnel to intervene. This phrasing masked the executions while creating a paper trail that absolved Allied forces of direct responsibility. The headquarters of the International Committee of the Red Cross operated from neutral Geneva, requiring its delegates to observe strict protocol non-intervention regarding ongoing military operations. Internal communications demonstrate that the International Red Cross maintained formal neutrality in its correspondence. About 900,000 men passed through the Waffen-SS. Formally, they counted as regular combatants. Major General Maxwell Taylor formulated a legal exit strategy. He redefined them. Rules changed. Taylor delivered a direct verdict. These camp guards were not soldiers. They were jailers and executioners. The Geneva Convention offered no shield. The rules of war simply ignored them. Protection vanished. A Swiss delegate wrote to Geneva. He confirmed the situation. Military authorities suspended normal prisoner protocols. Care went strictly to the living. The SS entered a gray zone. Status meant nothing. This new category required specific paperwork. This legal fiction required physical proof. Clerks processed the personnel files. Red ink fell. The visual stamp read "shot" while trying to escape. Clerks manually entered this fake cause of death across the official military registry. Hundreds of unrecorded executions created massive statistical holes in official military reports. Catholic priest Edward Doyle witnessed these exact reprisals deep inside Dachau. Rabbi Herschel Schachter entered Buchenwald alongside American infantrymen on April 11, 1945. Armored units of the United States Third Army rapidly secured the perimeter. Military chaplains were the first men to face this psychological shock. Schachter stood quietly in the courtyard as liberated survivors confidently pointed out their former tormentors. He did not intervene. The Dachau facility held over 30,000 registered prisoners upon liberation. Across these massive camps, both men observed the exact same dynamic. The church required forgiveness. Yet doctrine also demanded strict justice. Forgiveness proved impossible in these courtyards. Spiritual institutions failed to apply standard theological frameworks to the captured guard personnel. The sheer scale of the crimes erased previous rules for everyone present. Conventional morality provided no adequate answers. Why did Allied command tolerate executions of surrendered camp guards? It eliminated key perpetrators fast. It bypassed lengthy judicial trials. This window of sudden lawlessness became transitional justice. Generals inspected Dachau and Buchenwald. They saw the filled railway cars. They ordered a conscious pause. Troops stepped back. Starving inmates took control. Revenge was swift. The 1929 Geneva Convention protected surrendered soldiers. Killing unarmed combatants constituted a war crime. Allied commanders ignored the rules. The most notorious figures vanished. The pause ended. Officers stepped in. Army units cleared the battered corpses. Investigators stacked blank dockets into manila folders for future formal courts. Military police secured the iron gates. Mob justice ceased. The metallic clicks of camera shutters echoed instead. Signal Corps photographers documented the remaining physical evidence. The first Nuremberg trial opened in November 1945. Building a prosecution took time. Survivors wielded violent agency during the temporary power vacuum, while establishing the official global legal framework ultimately took 7 long months. The Geneva Convention of 1929 meticulously detailed the protection of captured prisoners of war. But by the spring of 1945, those rules proved useless. The summary executions in Dachau directly violated that treaty. The Hague Conventions demanded humane treatment for surrendered troops. The law banned murder. It banned torture. The SS guards at the camp had formally laid down their weapons. Legally, shooting them constituted a clear war crime. Yet these established regulations offered zero protection to the actual camp inmates. The original Hague Convention was ratified in 1899. This agreement happened decades before the construction of extermination camps. The old treaties strictly regulated traditional battlefields. They missed the reality. They never anticipated concrete gas chambers. The SS operated entirely outside standard military combat, slaughtering millions of unarmed civilians. Treaties failed. The old law collapsed. Traditional jurisprudence guaranteed procedural rights to individuals who spent years destroying human beings outside any legal process. Philosopher Hannah Arendt observed this contradiction and categorized the phenomenon as radical evil. The events transcended ordinary malice, rendering standard ethical frameworks inadequate. For the liberated prisoners, abstract principles of international law held no weight against years of daily degradation. One Dachau survivor, participating in the fatal beating of a capo, described his action as restoring moral order rather than mere vengeance. Legal institutions approach this trauma through the rigid lens of ordinary civilian criminal procedure. Printed formal judicial blanks required investigators to fill out exact hours and specific calendar dates for continuous psychological assaults. Post-war tribunals requested documentary evidence confirming the precise timing of every physical strike. An infantry officer walked the cold concrete floors. He inspected the empty gas chambers. It was April 1945. He stared at the crematoria. He sat down. He wrote a letter home. God destroyed Sodom, his pen scratched. Some things cannot exist. Heavy steel crematorium doors stood wide open. They mocked his printed military manuals. Documenting years of daily psychological torture proved impossible. Courts demanded precise times. Tribunals required physical evidence. Proof vanished. War laws governed armed battlefield combatants. The 1929 Geneva Convention regulated combat. They failed inside these extermination camps. Protocols for captured enemies became trivial. Regulations meant nothing. Troops questioned their fundamental training. Soldiers faced moral paralysis. The framework collapsed. Discipline shattered. Law yielded to swift reprisal at the Janowska camp, where conventional justice fractured under the weight of unrecorded mass murder. A machine gunner pressed the trigger at Dachau, April 29, 1945. The metal sear clicked sharply in the cold spring air. Surrendered SS guards dropped to the dirt. The American soldier from the 45th Infantry Division watched his own hands operate the weapon. He felt physically detached from his actions. The heavy firing stopped. Quiet settled over the execution wall. 4 decades later, researchers would uncover the truth. The United States War Department classified the combat reports. Generals locked the documents away, erasing these frontline executions from official records until the late 1990s. The files disappeared. Philosopher Michael Walzer framed this specific suspension of ethics as the problem of dirty hands. Troops broke the rules. They executed unarmed men. In response, victorious governments absorbed their moral stain. The state needed a clean history to rebuild post-war Europe. Individual breakdowns became national secrets. Commanders ignored the blood pooled on the concrete. Allied military leadership simply looked away. Allied armies demanded strict, lawful justice, yet they deliberately permitted extrajudicial executions across the liberated territories. General Command faced a stark administrative choice regarding their traumatized soldiers. They could initiate formal prosecutions or quietly tolerate unauthorized retribution. They selected silence to evade direct institutional liability. The military bureaucracy maintained a calculated blind spot regarding these spontaneous killings. Jurist Telford Taylor, who later served as prosecution counsel at Nuremberg, closely analyzed this phenomenon. He noted that such initial reprisals occupied a specific gray zone located somewhere between vengeance and law. Existing legal frameworks proved entirely inadequate for addressing the newly discovered atrocities. The International Military Tribunal in Nuremberg would only officially open in November 1945. Throughout those intervening summer months, functioning legal mechanisms remained completely absent from the shattered continent. Informal executions temporarily filled this immense administrative vacuum. Officers on the ground merely awaited the establishment of an official judicial tribunal. Two concepts of justice collided in the spring of 1945. This sudden legal void birthed a complex phenomenon across occupied Europe. Nazi atrocities represented absolute evil, but the liberators' retaliatory actions introduced profound moral ambiguity. The normal rules of war collapsed entirely when soldiers confronted the crematoria. Italian writer Primo Levi survived 11 months in Monowitz, the third camp of the Auschwitz complex. He later called this psychological collapse the gray zone. Inside this space, extreme trauma temporarily erased all standard boundaries between victim and executioner. Allied command faced a difficult philosophical dilemma regarding the extrajudicial actions of their own troops. They chose systematic collective silence. Military clerks left blank white pages in official camp reports right where the chaotic first days of liberation should logically appear. The gray zone became a highly convenient political shield for Western governments. It justified wiping unauthorized military executions from the formal historical record completely. The documents remained completely empty. Why did official history choose to forget these episodes? A pure narrative of justice demanded pristine liberators. The sanitization of the past commenced immediately after the international tribunals concluded. The Nuremberg transcripts filled over 15,000 pages, meticulously documenting Axis crimes while entirely ignoring Allied actions. It was an intentional geopolitical decision to maintain a clear division between good and evil. Historian Robert H. Abzug noted this precise phenomenon regarding the chaotic aftermath of liberation. A stark reality emerged at sites like Dachau. The thin line between justified anger and uncontrolled fury vanished. The Allied command needed a sterile victory narrative for the post-war global order. Any moral ambiguity threatened the foundation of the newly established legal frameworks. To preserve the illusion of a flawless triumph, historians struck the unauthorized killings from the chronicles. One general's command sealed the truth for decades. Supreme Command orders enforced the memory erasure. General George Patton reviewed the detailed Dachau investigation. The United States Third Army commander slowly turned the typed pages. He signed the official dismissal. No charges, no trials. Cardboard folder closed. Dull thud. The heavy secret stamp struck the cover. Steel safe locked. 46 years of state secrecy. The official military record went silent. Archives shut tight. Other front lines mirrored this bureaucratic blackout. The British 11th Armored Division secured the Bergen-Belsen camp in April 1945. Medical crises dominated their official dispatches. Typhus outbreaks filled the daily logs. Retaliation against the captured German guards disappeared from the paperwork. The Allied High Command required a clean historical narrative. Without any documented consequences, the raw chaos of liberation faded from the institutional timeline, leaving the classified Dachau probe buried deep inside the United States National Archives. It waited in the dark until 1991. Correspondents on the ground embraced the exact same logic of silence that the High Command demanded. Margaret Burke White stood inside Buchenwald, witnessing liberated inmates execute their former guards. And she made a conscious choice. She lowered her camera. The shutter remained unpressed while the violent scene unfolded right in front of her. The international press faced a massive scale of visual horrors, choosing to broadcast only the emaciated survivors and the crematoria. When Soviet troops reached Majdanek in July 1944, their dispatches framed the discovery strictly as a moment of triumphant justice. Western media later adopted this exact template, keeping the political narrative of a righteous Allied liberation untarnished. Burke White noted in her memoirs that the raw vengeance seemed too private to record. Journalists voluntarily filtered out the ambiguous reality of extrajudicial killings. Even when a few photographers captured the chaotic reprisals, the institutional barrier stood firm against public exposure. Military censors intercepted and rejected those rare photographs. How did the Cold War affect military archives? It froze them. International politics cemented this filter. Military censors reviewed stacks of contact sheets from the liberated camps. Officers scanned the glossy squares for scenes of vigilante justice. A red wax pencil left a thick mark across the unwanted frames. They never printed them. Cold War policies demanded a spotless narrative. By 1947, the Truman Doctrine required a clear moral distinction between Western democracies and the Soviet bloc. West Germany had to become a reliable European partner. Acknowledging that Allied troops engaged in extrajudicial executions undermined this new image. The narrative remained pure. Public attention shifted to the formal procedures of the Nuremberg trials between 1945 and 1946. Informal justice in the camps was erased from the historical record. Early Holocaust studies followed this mandate. Researchers concentrated on documenting the crimes of the defeated regime. Academic science bypassed the issue. Archives hold thousands of volumes on troop movements, yet they remain silent on soldiers' reactions inside the camps. Military historians adopted this evasion tactic. Logistics took priority. Combat histories of the 45th Infantry Division span hundreds of pages. Fuel consumption is detailed. Ammo counts matched. The liberation of Dachau occupies just 3 dry paragraphs. Writers erased context. The pattern repeated. The 6th Armored Division liberated Buchenwald. The 11th British Armored Division entered Bergen-Belsen. Their official records describe basic humanitarian missions upon arrival. Documents omitted severe moral failures completely. Michael Berenbaum identified this phenomenon. He called these gaps zones of silence. Scholars feared empowering historical deniers. Any mention of Allied troops losing control became taboo. Censors sanitized the historical record over the following decades to protect the official victory narrative. The topic closed. Half a century ago, reprisal executions were just an anomaly buried in the margins of textbooks. Today, they form the core of trauma studies. The paradigm shifted. This selective memory shaped a massive historical vacuum. The sterile, carefully edited photographs of grateful survivors replaced the chaotic reality of the first days. Smiling faces hid the execution of camp guards. Handshakes masked the breakdown of discipline. The sanitized narrative concealed the true psychological impact of the Holocaust on Allied troops. This wall finally cracked. Daniel Goldhagen, Robert Abzug, and Deborah Dwork analyzed the raw field reports. Goldhagen's book on perpetrators sold over 500,000 copies worldwide. They integrated the battlefield executions into the broader context of camp liberation. They proved the violence was a predictable consequence. It was no glitch. The major shift started in the late 1990s. The camera starts. A low hum fills the room. An old man leans forward. He speaks words the tribunals erased. Military historians failed to break the censorship. Survivors themselves struck the final blow. Age stripped away their silence. Time faded. Silence broke. They faced the lenses. Magnetic tape captured every breath, every act of blood, every reprisal. Censors failed. They spoke. State archives could not hide this. The Shoah Foundation launched in 1994. They traveled across 56 countries. They recorded 50,000 video interviews. A vast independent archive emerged. The government lost its monopoly. These tapes bypassed military command. Survivors reclaimed their own narrative. They refused quiet victimhood. Anger surfaced alongside raw resilience. Revenge existed beside grief. Primo Levi understood this reality. "We are not saints," he wrote. He documented the hard truth. Humanity holds a capacity for darkness. The urge for vengeance remained intact. No state decree could erase that. Thousands of hours of raw footage destroyed the clean narrative. The unedited video accounts of spontaneous liberation violence now reside securely in permanent global digital archives. 75 years of chronological distance finally allowed the classified military archives to speak without ideological constraints. Acknowledging these deeply buried records restores the unvarnished picture of the Third Reich's final collapse. Historians required over 7 decades of meticulous investigative work to untangle the post-war narrative. They needed time to separate the formal prosecution of the Nazi state from the chaotic retribution inflicted by its victims. In Dachau, Buchenwald, and Bergen-Belsen, sudden physical reprisals became a grim mechanism for restoring human agency. A brief act of violence transformed starving inmates from disposable targets back into individuals capable of direct judgment. Documenting this stark reality does not minimize the well-documented guilt of the fascist regime. It simply records the true psychological wreckage left behind by years of systematic extermination. The raw history of liberation proves a harsh truth. Conventional morality shatters upon contact with unparalleled cruelty. The American machine gunner standing in the Dachau coal yard ceases to be an erased anomaly. His unedited combat report now occupies its permanent, unredacted place among the official documents of the era.